Welcome to the Solid Signal Podcast for the week of September 1st, 2014, the week of Labor Day. I'll start out with telling you guys a little bit of a secret. I'm actually recording this quite a bit earlier because, hey, even bloggers deserve a day off now and again. I usually record on Mondays or early Tuesdays, and it seems like Monday is Labor Day, so I'll be off, and Tuesday will be the day I come back and deal with all the stuff that I should have dealt with on Monday. Now, if you imagine my office, it's got a ton of equipment in it, not just the computer equipment that I need to get through the day and the recording equipment that I need to make this podcast, but also a bunch of test equipment because I'm always testing out stuff for the Solid Signal blog. That's part of the fun of being the guy that I am. And so there's a ton of electronic stuff, there's blinking lights and all sorts of things. I had a visitor to my office, which is pretty rare, actually. And this visitor, after taking a look around, said to me, "Aren't you afraid that all that stuff is going to give you cancer?" And then, of course, I stopped for a second in abject fear, and then I decided to answer. No, I am not afraid that this stuff is going to give me cancer. I'm not afraid that it's going to make me hear the radio coming through my fillings either. And I'm not afraid that it's going to control my mind and make me start watching the Oprah Winfrey Show. See, what I'm talking about here is that everything that we live with in our modern lives, whether it's a computer, a DVR, a television, or whatever, emits a certain amount of RF interference. And could that RF interference be somehow making us sick? Look, I'm no doctor, but I have read up a lot on this stuff, and I'll tell you I'm not worried. Because the amount of RF interference that we're talking about is not that much. We're talking about the amount of energy that's given off by maybe the weakest possible flashlight that you could buy. Or put it this way, put everything on my test bench together, and it probably gives off as much interference as a 5-watt light bulb. I grant you, it's not light. It's another form of radio frequency, and yes, we know that some forms of radio frequency can be hazardous in large amounts, like, for example, X-rays. But there's no evidence that any of this stuff is giving off X-rays, so I'm not worried about it. And as I said, I'm not a doctor. You have to do your own research, talk to your own doctor, but personally, I'm not worried about it. Of course, the other thing this brings up is that there were some studies back couple of years ago that suggested there was some sort of link between cancer and cell phones. And after a lot of listening, a lot of studies, it turns out a lot of that was based on much older cell phones and levels of exposure that are really just much higher than any normal person would do. If you do tend to use a cell phone a lot, you might want to consider a Bluetooth headset just because, well, you never know. But we're talking about people who were exposed to very high-powered cell phones a long time ago and were on them for a very long time. So there really isn't a whole lot more to that than just an urban legend. And again, it's not something that I'm terribly worried about. As you get older, and folks, I've told you before that I'm not exactly what you call a spring chicken. As you get older, you realize there's always going to be something that was perfectly fine when you were a kid that you find out later was incredibly bad for you. And, this has been going on for thousands of years, in fact. When I was a kid, we used to play on rusty swing sets all the time and old tires, and that was considered actually good parenting, letting your kids play on rusty swing sets. Today, obviously not the case. There's always going to be new information. There's always going to be things happening and things changing. It's part of the evolving world that we live in. And I, for one, am glad that we live in the world that we live in today. When I take a look at all of my electronic toys, most of which were impossible just 20 years ago, I'm glad that I'm here, and I can't personally wait until the future when we see even more stuff that makes a lot more sense and isn't just necessarily for entertainment, but really makes the world a better place. Have a great week from the Solid Signal Podcast.